Hello, everybody. From me and my new microphone, if you're watching on YouTube, I finally got the new mic. And I'm even more excited about the guest I have on today. She's not really a guest, she's a friend. She's been one of my clients, students for a number of years, and in her own right is just an incredible human being. The way that Ashley lives her life is the true definition of embodiment. Like everything that she does everything that she is in the world is like literally built into her cells. And the more I get to know Ashley, um, the more enriched my life becomes because of what she can reflect back to me from all of the things that she sees and lives and breathes every day of her life. Even the mundane things that you wouldn't think are much, Ashley has this way, this magical way of translating the mystery of life into something that's tangible, into something that is, you know, just so beautiful, and bringing the sacred back into the littlest of things is one of Ashley's great talents. And so this is the second episode I'm recording with Ashley. We spoke last year in season 2, and we have both been through such a journey in that time of transformation and just deepening in our embodiment and our processes and systems. And so, for that reason, too, I'm very excited to have Ashley back on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, me too. We have been talking around a few big topics. But today we're going to be diving into some really juicy things because Ashley and I, we're also on a human design experiment. And so understanding how we work and how we tick has also been part of the journey in the last year. And so, again, reason why I'm very excited to speak with you today, Ash. But we love to go deep into things. And so we're going to look at the energetic of extraction. We're going to dive into the matrix. Nothing small, nothing shallow here. And we're also going to be looking at the shit. We're going to be looking at the shit today.
Yeah.
Don't you think I forgot that part? Okay. We're going to be talking about the shit because that's a vital part of living,
Yeah.
Ashley, as you know.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
if anyone hasn't listened to the episode I recorded with Ashley in season 2, can you just give it like a debrief or a short little clip of where you're situated in the world, what you're currently doing, and yeah, why it is you're here with me today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm in New York State in the United States. I live in a little town called Derby, New York. Um, and my family moved here shortly after the pandemic started. And long story short, we started like a homestead in a food forest. Um, but prior to that, I'm trained as an art teacher and an artist. And what I'm doing now is I'm raising two children. I who are ages 4 and 6. And I am currently working as an assistant teacher at a Waldorf school, um, which is like an independent school that is really all about teaching kids or teaching with the idea that kids have bodies, souls, and um,
Mm,
emotions and minds is
mm,
really, in a nutshell, that's the deal there. And then, just doing all of that, living life, reflecting, trying to figure out my own way.
yeah,
And so that's what I'm doing. That's my content. That's the context
it's
of
beautiful.
me.
Thank you. Because it really, the way you sample from all of your environments and then digest and embody and reflect this back is what your synthesis is the word I want to use,
Hmm.
is incredible.
Hmm.
Incredible. And not for those who are into shallow topics.
Mm-mm.
So we're
Mm-mm.
gonna really go in there and it's all going to weave together. So I feel like a good place to start is this context around the matrix. And there was a post I remember you sharing with me that, influenced this. So maybe we can start there and then dive into the definition that you found.
Mhm. So I had shared a post in my stories and then with Adriana about it was actually a really popular homesteading post, and essentially it's a post I've or a group I followed and love really. But I was watching it one day. I was watching a video and it kind of said something along the lines of like you need to exit the matrix, or if you want to exit the matrix was the key term that like set flags for me, because I had actually seen that term in a number of posts from a number of different coaches and healers. It wasn't actually just homesteaders. It's
Mm.
kind of this thing I'm seeing. And at first I was like, of course I want to exit the matrix. And the more I saw it, it just started like making me feel this tingles, like, or like this feeling of like, wait, what is that really about?
Mm.
And in this particular post of homesteaders, it was all about the skills that they could offer, and and that there was nothing like more important during a recession to invest your money in than education and learning skills so that you can exit the matrix.
Mm.
And I have been homesteading. And there was a time in our homesteading experience when I really did have this felt sense of like, we have to accumulate skills and resources and like protect ourselves. And like, there was that feeling of like something bad's coming and I need to
Mm.
get ready for it. And a lot of these posts sometimes feel that way. And after doing it and actually learning all the skills, sourdough, like all the fermentation stuff, all the canning, starting the food forest, growing fruit trees. And I mean, there's still a lot more we can learn. And I still believe it's all really important. And yet, we actually got to a point where we couldn't go any further because there's like debt. And so when I see someone selling, and it's okay, like we're working on it, but there, what I realized in watching this and having my own experience was that if I really want someone to be free, the first thing I'm going to tell them before I say learn about sourdough, which you can do for free by the way, um is to get debt free. That could be like your first, like that's the thing to start with first. And yet no one that I had seen online was saying it in their sales
Mm.
pitch. And it made me wonder like, why aren't these conversations happening, and why does everyone want to be free from the matrix? Why did I? And what is the matrix? What is the matrix?
Well, it's interesting too because, with this whole podcast, like we're probably going to ask more questions than give answers, right?
Yeah.
And so I love that this one piece has, percolated all of these questions. But one thing I'd love you to clarify or just deepen into before we go into the definition of the matrix is
Yeah.
your experience of debt. Like, what do you mean by that when it comes to homesteading and potentially how you see that pattern in other areas too?
Sure. So, I mean, the first most obvious when I think of debt, obviously, is just money. I mean, and owing money for different things like school loans, credit card debt. But the problem too is that with that debt, it's it's a roadblock. It gets, because you do need cash flow to like continue like paying for what you need to pay for, like even like your mortgage is debt, like there's a lot of different areas of financial debt. that can make it difficult to actually be like free or sustainable, is how
Mm,
I was thinking about
got
it.
it. Cool.
But also there's an emotional debt to that, because there's like shame and guilt and
Mm,
fear, and it makes it difficult to move forward with investments, like, for example, investing in learning skills,
mm,
um, or whatever you want to invest in yourself, like
right.
whatever that is.
Right.
um, and so I think there's even that piece
Mm,
that maybe I don't fully understand how, how it all ties in, but I think it's a heaviness in your body too. So it can affect your health, which homesteading is all about health too. So there's I'm sure there's a lot of like money mindset work or things like that are part of this, uh, conversations that can be had. But if it's someone who hasn't done any of that work at all,
mm.
like, it's pretty difficult to just get started. It can be a real block.
I'm also, thank you for that. But I'm also wondering, like, how you see this in the land that you work on in your homestead. Like, is there debt in the land that you have to repay before there's even a yield of
Mm.
any sort? That's what I'm thinking as well, because,
Oh, that's
like my mind is like patterns, like where can we see this thing playing out, which this will unfold in our conversation very evidently. But like I
yeah.
was thinking in that way too, like your experience over the last few years of like, I've been watching you and going through the process of like giving back to the land, making the earth really nutrient before it even produces something.
That's Thank you so much for bringing that up. That's beautiful, because yes,
Mm,
and one of the very first things that we realized before we could even grow a thing, as even a seed, yes, it was soil.
mm.
And we had to spend a good deal of time preparing spaces, so that it's a space holding endeavor. And really, because it's all about understanding what you want to create, and then creating the space for that first, and then building up the soil and the foundation.
Mm,
And there's a lot of different ways to do that. But even there's a deeper story on our particular piece of land. So that was interesting before I ever even started growing anything, which is that we live in an ash tree. Like, there's a marsh behind us, and there's ash trees. And for anyone who knows, there's the I'm gonna mess up the name, but there's a borer, an emerald. I'm gonna forget it. It's basically decimated. It's an emerald vine borer. I'm
it's okay.
mixing up my bugs. But anyway, you get the idea. It's decimated all the ash trees. And when I very first stepped foot on this property, but they're a pioneering species, and so there's a bunch of new ones popping up, but it's very wet. So I guess what I'm saying is the land was like seeping, and there was just like puddles, like in that transition from winter to spring. And I just had my own personal feeling of like the earth is sobbing.
Mm,
Like the land is like
mm,
tearing and crying and like seeping and sobbing. And it was just this feeling I had of it. And so in that idea of debt, it's like this feeling of like, I have to repay, I have to rebuild and
mhm.
repay in my own way,
Yeah.
for this damage.
Yeah. I just, immediately think about the work that I do and the systems that I use and how we have to bring ourselves back to the debt that we have been running from in terms of the wound
Hmm.
and having to feel that and And a lot of the energy of like the dark feminine and the emotions that are there, and with the element of earth and the season of winter, it's like when you are able to be there and feel that, it fills it up and
Mm,
replenishes the dead, and it becomes nutrient dense soil for the next thing to come through.
mhm,
So it just is so beautiful that we can look at the earth like this
mhm.
and can make these connections, because it's all relationship.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm.
That's beautiful. You just like brought that out of me. Like that whole like debt is more so much more than,
Mm.
you know,
Projector
money.
reflector, baby.
That was amazing. Because of
Oh,
course I felt that. Of course it was there, but it is
yeah.
the deeper layer.
Mm.
And it's this this other piece, this piece that's lost. Like I was just reading, it's a book called The Seed Keeper, and I haven't even made it through the book because I have only been able to read the first poem, and I've just been like kind of stuck on this poem.
We need
And
this book in the show notes.
I know. So it's going to be an amazing book. I just haven't read it, but the poem talks about the pact that humans had with seeds, and that it's a pact that has been forgotten. And I think that also coincides with this idea of debt, that the seeds
Mm.
come back every year, um, and are available for saving if we agree to be in relationship with the seeds, and not lose the pact. And they'll take care of us for life if we take care of them for life, and that's the relationship. And I'm finding that in
Mm.
all of my relationships, like the older I get and the more I mature, like I a younger version of me just is so quick to like be like, I'm done with this. I don't want to do this anymore. This is too uncomfortable. This is too hard. And
Yeah.
now the older I get, I see the value in like staying, with and like working on it. And I think it's this idea of having a pact with the seeds and the earth. It's like the staying power of it.
So there's just this natural bridge that I'm sensing between um, the intention of the seed and the reciprocity of the seed, and how we're naturally designed with that, and how it's just woven into what the matrix is. And so there's no avoiding it. So I feel like this is a good point to like segue into the definition of the matrix, and what we're sensing there. And I think that's where it'll flow into extraction as well. So maybe we should go with the definition, and anything else you want to add to what I just said.
Okay. Um, well, I'll start by just reading the definition I found today, which I'll just also preface that with is totally different than what I thought the Matrix was when I first started hearing everybody talking about the Matrix.
Cool.
So the definition that I found of the Matrix is that it's an environment or material in which something develops, a surrounding medium or structure. And the sentence that they used is their example sentence, which I just always love when I'm looking up definitions, is that it said, free choices become the matrix of human life. And so when we're talking about the seed pact, or the seed, um, the seed contract, at some point someone made a free choice to disregard the contract and start
Mm.
making different um, different choices, like, right, to not use the seed, to not honor the earth,
Yeah.
and to not to not have an honorable harvest. And and so I guess to me the matrix is this, I don't know what else to call it other than this free flowing sort of like environment that we create that can change. So it's not, I used to think of it as like there's the matrix and then there's the earth and everything happening underneath. And in a way it is, but they're actually connected. You know, one creates the other. And the matrix as we know it, I think, you know, has to hold whatever the new thing we want to create is, just as the, you know, the matrix that existed, the energetic matrix, the people who used to have contracts with seeds morphed, is sort of how I'm thinking of it. Because I had a much more negative view of the matrix that, you know, before, that it was created by bad people making bad choices, you know, an oversimplification. And I think it's much more complex than that, I guess, is what I'm saying.
The definition you gave and like the example of like how you would just highlighted to me the importance of doing our personal work and becoming sovereign beings, because otherwise you're subjected and taking in other people's information of how to be, other contracts to be in, what's correct, you know, based on what others say. And I can see how like the matrix gets a bad rap, but my understanding of the matrix is so connected to the archetypal great mother that everything happening is the matrix. Everything is her. So she's simultaneous. It's so dynamic. It's like simultaneously creating and gestating and dying and the shit and like everything all at once. And it brings me back to the biology of women too, and our ability to like have this diffuse awareness of like holding multiple things at once, and like actual biological mothers who are like doing so many things on so many levels. And like, to me, when you first brought up the concept of the matrix, you know, in our sideline discussion that led to this episode and this conversation, there was a word that I remember using about like this whole thought of exiting the matrix being so like entitled and like so like so just like unaware and not connected to like the feminine truth that everything is the way that it is and it's perfect.
And that every aspect of it is connected. And it is interesting that, you know, when we were speaking about it, that word entitlement, like I think you actually brought it up first. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think about it that way. But it is this kind of hand washing. Like, no, not me. I'm not part of that. Like, I'm just gonna do this other thing. And I understand the intention. I think, like, I think there are good intentions. And I just think this is what happens when like words aren't really fully fleshed out and agreed upon and understood. Because you know, as a child, I'm gonna, in the first episode we discussed this place called the Pond, and I told this whole story there. And it's a place that I would go with my great aunts and uncles, and it's where I really first understood land. And we would camp, and there was no TV, and so I would do things like pick up, I promise this will make sense. I would do things
I trust you.
pick up the Bible, and I would read, you know, what do you do when you're a kid? You open up to page 1, you start reading Genesis. And I would read about all this stuff being created. And then, you know, if it was especially like a rainy day, right, you're inside the camper and I'm reading all this and I'm like, wow, there's this whole story about how all these things got created. And then I would go run and I would go be in the things, right? I would go be at the pond and I would watch the tadpoles. And I would think about how our campers were on the land, but then there's this whole other life happening very slowly and also fast.
Yeah.
And I would just think, oh, we're like living as a kid. It's I guess I'm just illustrating how it's easy to think of the matrix as separate, because it
Mm.
feels like all these activities, human activities, are happening on top of all of these other natural things happening. But really, like, one thing grew from the other and also grew from the disconnection. And I
Yes.
think that's the point. I think the point is that the matrix, what we think of the matrix, or what I think people are talking about, is the disconnection that actually happened from the original matrix.
Yeah.
The earth's, the what you're talking about, the great mother, that energetic, like, archetypal, earth energy matrix, and how we suddenly felt like we were separate from it. And so the thing that we were mentioning in some of our past conversations is, when we think of the matrix as something to exit from, it then becomes something other than us.
Yeah.
And so then the conversation turns into, it's them versus us.
Mm.
Or me versus you. And so that conversation just feels like a conversation about, like, further separating us from something that we used to be, or can still be, very connected to
Yeah.
each other. And I could keep going, or I can stop if you have something that.
No, I'd love for you to keep going. I can feel you want to keep going. So.
Yeah. So and I think there was a reflection that I wrote for your Dance Your Wisdom program,
Mhm.
that I realized that in the other is always me. Because, and this I learned by just reading about, and honestly, it was like I just pulled it out of the thin air of the internet, like an Aboriginal um like idea of spirituality, that the soul is not just inside the body, that
Mm.
the soul is outside of the body in everything, and that the land owns us, not the other way around. And I started in my growing, in the homesteading thing, which at first was just all about wanting to have, like, safe, healthy food. But in the growing of food and working with plants, I started to see the literally, like, my soul in the plants.
Mm.
And I started to feel, um like, I could approach the plant as if it was me. So instead of, what am I going to get from this plant, it was like, this is what the plant needs. Now let me pretend I am that plant. Whatever that plant needs, I also need. So it's a totally different kind of plant medicine. It's
Yeah.
not about taking in the medicine. It's about paying attention to what it does. And this can be anything in the
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
to be less fragmented, to start seeing. And so you could do this with people,
Of course.
obviously.
Yeah. Of course.
And so I think, so to go back to that exiting the matrix, that's why we can't really exit it.
No.
And further, just maybe this is more the negative side of it, but if you're on a platform selling to the people, it's just funny because you are the matrix selling to the matrix. I don't know. Does that sound off?
No, sounds very on.
Okay. Because sometimes I think things, that I say things that I'm just like, oh, like, why? Like, I don't want to think that, but I don't want to see that. Like, but I'm like, that's what's happening, really.
Yeah.
Um, and so we can just be like, embrace the matrix in a way. Like, we don't have to like all the parts of it, but it's that shadow work. Like, that's okay, well, there's this thing, like, how do we transform that? It's really about the transformation of it.
Yeah. And it's always going to be relationship based. It's always going
Hmm.
to be, that's just how it is. I
Hmm.
don't know how else to say that. And you're right, there are good intentions, and like there are people who are saying we need to unplug from the matrix and like disconnect from like these messaging. But like if I think about it in a different way, like it's understanding that the messaging that we're getting is a part of us already, just amplified. And it's like,
Yeah.
do I want to choose to participate in this or nurture that? And it comes back to that free choice that you were speaking about with the intention, with the seeds too,
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
pacts that we make with the seeds and with ourselves, really,
Right.
you
Right.
know. Um,
Hmm.
and that takes time. And no matter how good your intentions are, how lovingly it comes from your heart, like there are just some things that are always going to ruffle other people's feathers and bother them, because that's where they are on their journey. That's where they are in their process. And it's not wrong, because that's how the matrix works. That's how life works. It's constantly dynamic and moving through from one thing to the next, from like the beautiful fruits down to the shit and the compost and back and around again. And
Hmm.
no matter where you are in your journey, like you could be listening to this conversation and being like, what are they talking about? Or like, wow, like this is really connecting with me. And both are true, both are
Right.
correct based on your relationship with truth, your relationship with soul, your relationship with your body and the earth. So it
Hmm.
always comes back to you and your personal responsibility to become sovereign and whole, so that you can understand what is distortion and what is truth.
Hmm.
So like those, I think about those seeds, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately within the context of like the seasons and moving from winter into spring energetically, and like how there's this, debt that we were talking about before that gets cleared and replenished, and then there's presence. And I always think about like the womb, the egg, and the sperm. I always think about the
Hmm.
three things that make it, and like how much nurturing and relationship there has to be receptive for reciprocity, for things to come together and create again. And I don't know, it's just something that is always happening, but like whether or not you're paying attention to it or have the awareness of it is totally different thing.
Hmm.
Totally
And
different thing.
that's, and I think that's just it. Like I said, I was like, yeah, exit the matrix. And it was just because there was some lack of awareness. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And it's as simple as that. And also so much more complex, because then there's also this, I'm trying to think,
Okay.
like, there's there's this really healing thing that happens, I think, because I was really feeling so frustrated about this idea of the matrix, so stuck, so angry, and like, and so
Mm.
like, yeah, like we're trapped here in this thing. I think I felt that way. And i I think other people are feeling that way. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think there's this really healing thing when you can even look at something like the matrix and see all the parts of yourself in it.
Yeah.
It just changes your relationship to it. And I think, again, we were talking in the beginning of the conversation about
Yeah.
staying power. So then when
Hmm.
you know when you start to see these parts of ourselves, it gives you some more staying power to like work with it
Yeah.
and
It just,
understand how you want to participate.
yeah. It reminds me of suffering. And I think a lot of the reason people want to leave the matrix is subconsciously connected to not wanting the suffering, to wanting to getting
Mm,
away from that way of thinking and being and operating, because there is a gross amount of suffering caused by living and being that way. And so, like, how do we not suffer? Let's create something new. And it really does touch on the staying point. And like, I always look, you look at it from the individual first. You can't change anything unless you look at the individual level. So where are we, or you, the listener, not able to stay with that and understand the purpose of suffering? It's not this
mm,
thing that we're being punished by. And this is like a lot of the illusion of the narratives that come through the Matrix, that we need to like cause no harm and have no children, and that humans are greedy and capitalism is awful, and like this ties into the extraction piece. But when I think about the Matrix from the mother, the suffering is so important. It's what creates the space to get back to truth, because
mm.
it's a cycle. It's always moving. It's not like, oh wow, like I'm embodied and now I'm great with my emotions. No, they're going to keep cycling through. It's like
Yes,
learning and acquiring the tools and understanding how the system, or yeah, how the system operates. And then the wisdom comes from knowing when to apply the tools at the correct time, and be able
yes,
to recognize, hey, this is where I'm at in my process with my emotions and whatever. And I know it's coming. I know I'm going to have to go through and feel this thing, but I trust and have the faith because I know what comes through the other side. And so we have to understand that, like, our suffering is integral. I mean, we signed up to be human beings. We live in this dualistic thing. We can't eject that. We can't escape that.
yes. And I know we were joking a lot about like the shit
Yeah.
and of course that came from, I was cleaning my chicken coop and we were having that conversation outside of this outside of this conversation. But really
Mm.
that is, I guess the composting
Mm.
is kind of the shit.
Yeah.
The that suffering is the suffering, and but that is like, I mean, in the closed system of a homestead, that's, I realized, I was like, this is where all of the nutrients comes from. Again,
Yep.
a repay of debt. It's it's what feeds the soil and helps to grow the next season's crops. And it's what makes you realize it never ends. Like, we can live this life not exactly the same way, no year is different, but what I've learned just in 3 years of doing it is like things just happen at the same kind of time, and you just get to know, like, oh, soon I'll do the carrots because the daffodils are done. Or like, I'm just thinking like today, these are like the signs I saw. Or,
Yeah.
oh, a week ago, nothing, 2 weeks ago, nothing was sprouting and now it is. And so there's also this like rhythmic, predictable, but not predictable at the same time, because, things die and things shift and change, but there is still a predictability about those seasons.
Yeah.
Um, and although I will say this year, so this goes back to the disconnection, and I don't totally know where it's going to go, but I spent the most time in the woods that I ever have this winter, like in the woods, like watching the things because of the school I'm teaching at. And so that's been the biggest gift I think of this year, because I've never truly in the earth like paid attention to nature, or not nature, excuse me, paid attention to like winter
Yeah.
and what happens
Mm.
in the woods and the plants.
Mm.
And it was the most confronting season to see, for the first time really see in the woods, because I was like, the goldenrod is flat, like why aren't we flat? It kind of pointed out to me a place again where we actually are doing the opposite of what is being called, or what we are being called to do at that time, naturally, biologically, like,
Yeah.
you know. And also, it's where the most destruction happens. The woods in the winter, I mean, there are moments that are like beautiful and snow covered, but I encountered there were these two trees that were growing together. And it was really interesting because I couldn't help but like see a family of four, because it was two big trees and two little trees. And what was so amazing is, as they were growing up this winter, these two trees totally fell over this way. So for people who are listening and not watching the video, my hands are together and I'm like having them fall in this opposite direction. But then what happened is, as they fell, all of the roots became exposed and they had become entangled. And so the roots were like, um, kind of like this web that created a cave, right? And you could see where some of the roots had ripped. And I couldn't help but think of like just total like divorce or destruction, or like a relationship. So again, this goes back to our idea of that disconnection that I was talking about. Or like when a thing is broken and then inside of it was this cavern, this womb, and it was just all wet because then the water came up. And so I guess I'm just sharing this because it happened in winter, and that's when, in that death cycle, like so much dies in the woods to become something else, and new spaces are created and things are ripped apart, and it seems really brutal, and yet it's just a totally necessary piece that we cannot ignore. And I guess that's also part of that suffering piece you were talking about too.
Totally. Like it's the meaning. When you were sharing that beautiful example in nature, it just highlighted to me again, it's the meaning we give the suffering. It's the meaning we ascribe to it, that we either can see it as this sacred, preparatory, necessary, vital thing if we're going to continue evolving, or we can get locked into it, like the roots, like locked into this battle with what is. And I think that's also why at the core of my teachings, it'll always be about opening and being with what is. Because unless we can do that and observe that, we're not going to be able to flow with the dynamic nature of life that is constantly changing all of the time. We're going to be in wrong relationship with it because we're ascribing a meaning to it that just doesn't serve the truth of what is.
Absolutely. And actually, if you can't be open to those things, you just, like the way I was feeling about the Matrix, like you get stuck. It gets stuck in you. Literally, you kind of freeze up, and that feeling, if anyone's ever had that feeling in their body, it's just so, that stuckness is actually the part that's painful, not feeling the actual feeling. When the things are flowing and moving, that can be a relief. And it's the stuckness that hurts. It gets stuck in your muscles, like, or at least this is my experience of it. It's like it's stuck in your muscles, it hurts in your bones, that's how it feels.
And it also just reminds me of, like, if you're not looking at that thing, you can eject the matrix all you like, but that thing's going to follow you.
Yes.
That's going to follow you because it's like inherent to why you want to leave the matrix. So it's just going to keep following you and repeating. But I feel like this is also the piece to that, or potential point in the conversation where we can begin to talk about extraction and control a little
Mm,
bit, because at least from where I'm sitting, this point where like we want to eject or skip over the suffering is sort of connected energetically to this, don't you think, Ashley?
yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's because, would you agree that the opposite of extraction is reciprocity?
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. But like, what is true reciprocity? That's another question that I think we can explore.
yeah,
But I think maybe we can reverse it that way. But yeah, true reciprocity to me is not just I give this to take that. It's a total,
right.
and it kind of ties into what I was talking about, being open to what is. There's like
Mm-hmm.
a set, like there's like an active component and structure of being like, I'm here, I'm staying, and I'm opening my heart, my mind, my body up to what may be available, the array of possibilities that are available when two individuals or two entities come together. It
Mm-hmm.
could be more variables than that. But
Mm-hmm.
like, for example, these conversations I'm having on the podcast are what I feel like is true reciprocity, because there's desire and intent to
Mm-hmm.
show up authentically. Um, there is recognition of the other person and respect for the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can have a set framework, but then we don't know what's going to unfold. And so for me, these conversations feel truly nourishing, not only while I'm having them, but well beyond.
Yes.
And there's a sense of elevation and co-creation with every conversation that I have that builds for me, for you, and hopefully the people listening. Like, I really hope that there's this sense that this is also not modeling beautiful, healthy relationships in our humanity, but like reciprocity as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so when we're talking about extraction,
Mm.
like what's, if I can ask you if you don't mind, like when you hear the word extraction, I mean, I can think about what I think of extraction is, surely,
Mm-hmm.
but when you think of extraction, like what is it to you? Or maybe even what does it feel like? Because I mean, for me, if I think the words, I think extraction is um, taking, taking more than you need, taking without permission, and not giving anything back. There's no relationship. It's
Yeah.
total disconnection. That's what I think of it as extraction.
Um, I would say it feels like it sounds like, I don't know how
Yeah.
else to describe it.
Yeah.
I think of it on multiple levels. I think of it in relationship to the earth, and
Mm-hmm.
how the shadow aspect of the masculine is just taking and
Yeah.
penetrating and taking and taking and taking. And that can be
Yes.
moved down into relationships with people.
Yeah.
I know we talked about, coaching dynamics and like teaching dynamics and the way we learn. We can just go in, I'm just going to take this and then get out. I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to contribute. I'm not
Right.
going to
Right.
share in the teacher-student dynamic. I'm just going to take and
Yeah.
disappear. So that's another aspect. And then intimate relationships, where we're that's also got, I think, a deeper context of like the subconscious programming we've received of what love is as well. So there's like a whole other
Yeah.
piece to that. But I'm just going in to get my needs met. And
Right.
that's it. And that's it. But it all for
Yeah.
me stems around the energetic patterns of masculine and feminine. And I do not want to use the word toxic. I want to use the word shadow, because a lot of what we've been talking about today really is looking at the shadow aspects of things.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important too, because it's not wrong, but it's a pattern that plays out in so many ways. And don't be disillusioned to think that just because you're a woman or feminine essence that you don't extract, because
Right.
we are both made up of these energetic things of masculine and feminine. Sorry, the word just evaded me.
That's okay.
And so where are the places that you just take? Where are the places that you force your
Mm,
way into things to make things happen? And people can feel that without you even, you know, being so obvious about it. Like, you think you're being coy. You might not. The thing is, you don't even know you're doing it sometimes. So
yeah.
it's a pretty confronting pattern, energetic pattern to look at.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because when I think of it, of course, so I'm curious to see, even for me now, what's going to come up as the deeper layer,
Mm,
because I think of it first with land-based practices. I think of it because I've been so much studying our food system. I see it there, just how cheaply can we grow a thing and not, and it have it not be totally nutrient dense and still give it to people like it's okay, and then also not really pay the people, and then the just myriad of problems that end up coming from that, like, people committing suicide because they can't, it gets, because
yeah,
farmers committing suicide, right, farmers committing suicide because then they can't even like have a livelihood, like it just, like, I think about it that way. And then I'm just wondering, like, on a personal level, I've already talked about ways that I know I was participating in extraction because I was just thinking of, I'm just going to grow this stuff and have it for my family, and then we'll be okay.
yeah,
You know, I mean, I know there's that, but then I know there are like more subtle ways that this comes through. I was even thinking about, in just watching your lives and also um,
mm,
reading Braiding Sweetgrass, and reading what the Honorable Harvest is. There isn't a specific written code, but she kind of tried to distill it in a number of things. And one of the pieces, and I talked about this on our last episode, but one of the pieces is even just like introducing yourself
mhm,
to um to whatever it is you're going to harvest, like, treating the plant as a being. And so I was even thinking about your lives, and it's subtle, but actually, this is like if people come into a live on Instagram and they don't introduce themselves. And I've noticed on your lives that you've been asking people, you're like, this is polite. You're coming into my space. But really, that has to do with extraction too, because, and this is probably why it's important to have these conversations, because it's these big things that are noticeable on these larger scales are insidious, really. They happen in these little ways.
yeah,
But the thing is, the more used to those little tiny micro extractions we become, like, the easier it is to just scale it up.
yeah,
Does that
yeah,
make sense?
yeah. It does. And people who don't know, it's just like, I don't mind if people come in and watch my live streams, right? Like,
Sure.
I don't mind, but like, it's like an etiquette. It's like a way of being, because it's like what you said. The way you do one thing is the way you do all things.
Mhm.
So, if you want to be in the practice of reciprocity, like, it's like, hello, acknowledge, recognize, thank. Even if you're
Mhm.
not going to be on it, like I'm using the example of the live stream, if you're not going to be on it for very long, like, say what you want to say, hello, goodbye, thank you, and then leave.
Mhm.
And like, it sounds really simple, but if you get really honest, like, how often, that's something I had to learn to do.
Sure.
Um,
And it's because, and part of it is it's a new way of people being, but it's a new technology. I mean, relatively, right,
Yeah.
speaking. And so you have to learn how things go. But I think it's a good example,
Yeah.
of just like of a small way that this happens.
Hmm.
Because even if you're introducing yourself, it's kind of like you have to introduce yourself before you can even ask permission, or before you can even engage, or and I was even thinking, there's just steps to things.
There
There's just ways to approach things.
are.
Um,
There's knowing the steps too, and then actually doing them is different. But I think also too,
sure.
like to go with that example a little deeper, when you do introduce yourself, you become open and are able to fully receive, because it's a two-way thing. You can't just go in there, and because extracting is one way in. So
Right.
you're only going to get so far, because everything in this dimension that we live in is going both ways. It's never just one way.
Right.
So if you're able to enter into something and like making the intention, making the introduction, opening yourself up, there's a likelihood of it touching something much deeper in you than if you're just going in there thinking with your mind, or what I want to get out of this.
Mm. And yes. And no, I was just thinking, because you said you were like, this connects to control, and I was like, okay, how? But if you're not open, you're totally controlling the situation.
Yeah.
Just even in that little example. And so of course, how does that like expand out larger? But yeah, by going in and just like, I'm just gonna sit here and not say anything. Yeah, it's a subtle measure of control over the situation, because you're afraid of what will happen if you open up.
A hundred
It's,
percent. I mean, it's
yeah,
why that teaching of how to practice doing that is at the core of my work.
yeah,
It's literally touches everything. And I'm so glad that you're like, how does it connect? And I'm so glad you connected the dot,
yeah, yeah,
because like they are so connected.
uh-huh. And I can, and so again, I think this is, if I look at my own self, in either in my past or even in my current life, like I definitely struggle with control. And it's funny because I also listened to your podcast earlier about perfectionism, and I know that those things are all linked, which was a great podcast to listen to before talking about, I don't know, extraction. And like it's a good jump off. But I do think, back to just struggling with control, because with you know being in control, um is just a way to try to avoid like the messiness that being open
Mm,
truly is.
yeah, and it ties into the suffering and the shit, because
And the shit.
you can't stop those
No.
things happening. This is it.
Mm-mm.
Like I say it all the time. It's not about stopping your emotions. It's not about stopping your reactions. It's not about stopping anything. It's like about shifting your relationship to it. And this is also something that I wanted to weave into it too, because like we're talking about the shadow of the masculine and the penetration and the extraction, but the other side that most people, you know how I am, Ashley, the other
Yeah.
side
Yeah.
of it is the shadow side of the feminine and the wounded maiden, and she's closed down and she's locked and she forces you to go in and get her,
Mm.
and she's not open. And like sometimes there's a wisdom in protecting yourself and closing down, but like the other aspect of this pattern is like the irresponsible, immature, which is I think a word I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
be unpacking on future podcasts a little bit more, especially around the archetypes. But that's the other side of it that I also see. It's like the lack of responsibility and making people go in and extract the thing that's inside of you
Mm.
that you don't want to take responsibility for feeling, acknowledging and expressing.
Oh, I hadn't even considered that.
Your face.
So it's, I know, sorry. So it's, I just have to wrap my head around that. So you're saying, just to make sure I'm
Mm.
understanding, so you're saying, yeah, it's it's like reverse extraction.
In a way, like I'll give you an example of it if you want. Like when I'm
Yeah.
working with clients, we are doing emotional work, but the context I come from is like the feminine mysteries and the archetypal patterns
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
the journey from maiden to mother. And sometimes, because of the nature of the work, like people want to get to the woman, the embodied woman, the archetypal inner mother. They want to get there, but they're locked down and closed and locked in their pattern, and they're expecting me with what I know and what I can see to go in there and get them out. And
I
this is the other
see.
part of extraction. Like it does no one service. It's no service for me to go in there and get
Right.
you, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so this is also like the where things get stuck and locked in around the suffering and the winter and the fear and the death, and like all of that stuff is usually the point that needs to be met for the cycle to continue. Because if we're looking about the evolution of the psyche through the archetypes, we're going from maiden into mother. It's a natural evolution that gets interrupted and stops somewhere.
Mm. Yeah, that
So
makes sense.
is that making more sense of like the pattern of like I cannot go in there and get you.
Yes. And so it's relying, yeah, it's relying on extraction in a different way. It's relying on the culture of extraction to be saved.
Yeah. This is why it's
Ugh,
such a big thing to look at, because it's not just the ways you extract, but also the ways you expect people to go in and
to,
get things and save you.
yeah, yeah, the ways you allow yourself to engage with extraction or be extracted.
And I
Yes.
definitely had to look at that myself quite a lot in my intimate relationships of where I was expecting my partners to go in and get me.
Mm,
And it is tied more, and maybe it's for a separate conversation we have, but it is also tied into the way that we learn to relate and love and express these
yeah.
emotions too. So it's multi-layered, but I think it's a good example for anyone listening to like go, oh wow, this is the profundity and the depth of these patterns. And
Yeah.
it's not just vilifying the extraction, because it's not about vilifying or being the victim or the hero or whatever, because victim consciousness so plays into all of this,
Yes.
into everything that we do. But it's looking at it from it off of that triangle, off of that map, and going, hey, I can put my hand up and see where I'm doing both of these things and see the cycle of it and disrupt it so that you can come back to a state of flowing with what is.
Yes. That's amazing. Kind of like I'm just loving that like that depth of just, it's not even depth, it feels like it's a totally other perspective. It's like multiple, it's like a crystal, like the having the multiple perspectives happening at the same time. And it just, and then of course knowing that then just like ups your level of responsibility to yourself and other people though too.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't want to make somebody else responsible for that because it doesn't even work. They can't even do it.
Nope. 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 Nope.
It's a dead end.
Well, this is the thing too, like no one really being responsible isn't for everyone. Because once you see these things, you can't unsee them, and then you do have to do something about it.
Yes.
Um, and that's beautiful, and it's also comes with its own set of problems.
Yes. It's like, I think it was Teal Swan that said like don't do shadow work if you don't intend on making the changes, because it's true, it will just be so painful. Once you see it and you
Mm.
keep living with it, it's just like cycles of all kinds of like shame and, you know,
Mm.
awful
Yeah.
emotion, just like hard, just, yeah. So it's like, um, and, and again, so going back to the shit conversation, like expecting
Perfect.
someone to extract, it literally is like you have to be willing to. So, because like the antidote to that, it's like, okay, so then what's the antidote to not expecting someone to extract for you is the willingness to roll up your sleeves and shovel the
Shovel that
shit,
shit.
move it from one place. And maybe this is where the masculine support comes in. Because I was thinking the
Yeah.
other day when I was, it's a really simple, like, but maybe that's what's so beautiful about these really simple examples of tangible, physical 3D things, because then
Mm.
we can get deeper. I was thinking about as I was like, making piles of this, chicken poo in my, wheelbarrow, and then moving it to my compost bin. The bin is like, without the bin, right? That's the healthy masculine, right? Without that bin to hold the compost, all of that material like breaking down and becoming something different,
Yeah.
you've got total pollution on your property. Without the bin to hold it in, other animals can get to it. Your dog can eat it. It gets in the water and infects everything that you don't intend it to.
Yep.
And so you need that bin, you need
Yeah.
that container. And so maybe, and this is what I think in my own process, I think I'm starting to really cultivate, like
Mm.
where I see more women also in my circles talking about wanting to develop a really strong, healthy inner masculine, um,
Yeah.
to contain and support that composting.
There's definitely, I remember when I first started speaking about it and you were like, yeah, this is something I'm really recognizing and seeing
Mm-hmm.
because, and also I want to take a step back and say it's a stage and it's like a step. So, at first you're like, I'm speaking to women specifically because like this
Yeah.
is what I see with my clients I've worked with and the women in my life, myself included, is that it's like, fuck the matrix, fuck the system. I don't want the masculine and the shadow masculine anywhere. Let's go full hog down the feminine path. Let's just dive right in. And then it becomes chaos, so
Mm.
much suffering, so messy. And like, I have approval for that. Like, that's fine. It's a stage. But at some point, when the timing is right, because everything's about timing, there'll be a moment where the natural, healthy masculine needs to be integrated to be like the riverbanks, to be like the structure that holds the chicken manure, the mind that supports the body. It just has to start coming in. These structures have to reform. And I know I even think about in winter, like all of the structures that had risen up through spring and summer and autumn are collapsing and falling back down to re-nourish and then eventually come through in a small seed and emerge again.
Yes.
Right. So like it
Right.
comes in a small seed first, and that might be a desire to the way you want to move your body in a more structured way, or you might want to start meditating, or you might want to, it might come up in your relationships and, the people that you're attracted, like it can come up in a number of ways. Like that's the
Yeah.
mystery, right? So it's no one way, but it
Right.
starts small and
Yeah.
it starts to form. And from my own personal experience of this, having gone through that cycle and starting to bring this healthy masculine, it wasn't intentional, but I could just see it was coming. And, I think I shared this example on a live stream or maybe in a message with you. I can't remember where. I've said it to a few people, but the practice of like moving my body very intensely and strongly was giving like, and it was rowing, like on a rowing machine,
Mm-hmm.
gave me, like during the experience of rowing, emotions were coming out of my body. Like I was crying
Mm,
and yelling and screaming, and like I was like, where the fuck is this coming from? And I was like, oh no, it's this. It's this, the structure and stability of that is allowing all the energy to move and decompose and like make the soil fertile inside of me, like to let the cycle flow. So
yes.
it's something that will look different for everyone. And hopefully the examples Ashley and I have given allow you to see that. But like in the embodiment world, it starts off with, it's like highly sensual and about sensation and emotion, but there also is a structure that has to come in for that to happen. And like every call that I have, every experience that I lead, be it one-to-one or individual, I always honor that structure first, because that's what makes it feel contained and as a sense of trust and ease, that the body can open to what's there. And opening doesn't happen without that containment or that structure. It doesn't.
Yes. And, as you're speaking, of course, I'm thinking about even teaching children, like, I can't, because that's the world
Mm,
I'm in. Like, it's that rhythm of, like in Waldorf, they talk about like the rhythm of the day. And I'm even thinking of like kids opening to play, right?
yeah.
It's kind of, it's the same kind of thing, but what's kind of interesting is, if it's a question, if kids don't learn to open to play, is that where we learn how to be open?
Well, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg, because to
Yeah.
play, you need parameters, you need rules, you
Right.
need structure. Otherwise, they don't know what they're playing.
Right.
So, like I think that is where we learn to open and imagine and explore and express, and also like the perfection of things going wrong inside of the game
Yeah.
is also a beautiful experience too, because like the structure doesn't just allow for opening, it shows us where there's possible disconnection and confrontation that happens, maybe more confrontation than disconnection.
Yeah.
And that is also really valuable.
Yeah. It is. And that's actually what, in relationships as adults, or to go back to, because I know you work primarily with women, but
Mhm.
it's the same idea. It's just like, it's like learning how to deal with the conflict and learning,
Yeah,
what to do with it. And yeah. So
yeah.
yeah.
It's and like and again, like even in that example, you can see where we're open or we're closed, where there's extraction, where there's force, and where there's reciprocity. Like you can see it's like there are all these little microcosms of the same thing
Yes.
if you're willing to look. If you're
Yeah.
willing to look and open yourself up to that. I know this exploration, it's slow, it runs on its own time, and
Mhm.
it's everyone's going to be different with it, but I think it's a really important pattern to look at,
Yeah.
big time. And uh, it only, by looking at this shit, it only brings more nourishment later. I feel like it's a good place to like wrap it up, wrap the conversation up,
Yeah.
to close it down. Yeah.
Because ultimately, in all of that we just covered, to even just to take it back to the beginning, or close to the beginning,
Hmm.
which is, the matrix is, or it's where it says free choices become the matrix of human life. So what kind of matrix do we want to create, is ultimately the way to wrap it up. Because if
Hmm.
you're open, what kind of matrix can be created from being open versus
Yeah.
disconnected and closed?
Yeah, totally. Oh, what a synthesis. I love talking to you.
I mean, I think it kind of wraps up the whole thing in a way, because yeah, that's the synthesis. It's like, it comes down to the choices we make and how we relate
Mhm.
to what kind of life we want to create. And so that's where the people who say exit the matrix, I can really just love what they're saying in a way, and give them a great big energetic hug, like, because it's like, um,
Mm.
in there, if they can learn to even become open to how they relate to the matrix the way it is now, you know,
Yeah.
and then make choices from there, they can transform it and create, I guess, I don't know, the life of their dreams. I don't know, just like a better life ultimately, right?
Well,
Like a healing, or like a better life for themselves, for
yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah. I think like the word better is, I also think of aligned. And the
Oh
more,
yeah, or
yeah,
yeah,
the more
aligned.
choices you begin to make from an aligned place, the possibilities of what's available in this matrix begin to really transform, because
Yes.
it's all there. Like, and I think about the mother again of the matrix and the mother. It's like,
Mm,
it's all there, darling. It's yours for the taking. Like, it's yours to have if you want
mm-hmm,
it, if you want to choose that. And you can
mm,
go in any direction you want to go in this life, and it's going to be
yeah.
perfect. But the mother like holds all of those possibilities, and
Yes.
she doesn't make any of them wrong.
Mm, I love
So
that.
yeah, thank you so much for saying yes to being back on the show. I selfishly am just like so stoked about it.
Oh my
um
gosh, I'm so happy to have the conversation,
yeah.
and to have a real conversation, and to not be so, you know, I don't know, we're like, just a real conversation that people get to listen to if they want to.
Yeah.
Not a prepackaged, prepared, just a real conversation. It feels really good to have. So
Oh,
thank you.
oh, you're so welcome. And thank you for listening. I hope you were able to sit back and receive that with, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the fullness and the richness and the complexities that came through in that, and the questions more than the answers. It's always important to me that I'm having as close as I possibly can to like real experiences on this show, and not rehearsed and not prepackaged and not perfect. And,
Mm-hmm.
just again, like even tying into this conversation, like showing the choices that we make and sharing the process, because this
Mm-hmm.
podcast is very much about the process and the relationships and creating a bigger vision, one conversation, or stepping into a
Yes.
bigger vision, one conversation at a time. So thank you everyone for participating. Thank you, Ashley, and see you next time.
Thank you.